Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling a case that's really going to stick with you, the Hargan family killings.
Yeah, this one really gets you thinking.
It starts off seemingly straightforward, like a murder-suicide, but
There's a lot more to it than that.
right. That's exactly what we're going to unpack today using the 48 Hours episode, Blood is Thicker, the Hargan family killings. So, to set the scene, we're in McLean, Virginia.
Fancy.
Oh yeah, super wealthy suburb of D.C., million-dollar homes.
Perfect families.
Well, that's what we're here to find out, right?
Yeah.
So we meet Pamela Hargan, a successful businesswoman. She's got it all, the big house, and she's completely devoted to her three daughters, Megan, Ashley, and Helen.
Seemed like she really had her life together.
Totally. But, even in picture-perfect families, there could be some serious tension bubbling beneath the surface. And things take a dark turn. On July 14th, 2017, Pamela's ex-husband, Steve Hargan, gets a call about, get this, gunshots at Pamela's house.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine that?
Heart-dropping kind of call.
I know. He's frantically trying to reach Pamela and Helen, but nothing. It's chilling.
So what happened?
Well, Detective Vickery arrives at the scene, and it's devastating. Pamela and Helen are found dead. Pamela's in the mudroom. She was shot twice in the head, and she was partially covered with a quilt and, get this, a dog bed.
A dog bed. That's strange.
I know, right? Super weird. And Helen's found in the bathroom with a rifle between her legs.
So it looks like a murder-suicide.
That was the initial thought, yeah. But the detectives on the case, Byerson and Elliott, started noticing things that didn't quite add up.
Like what?
Well, for starters, Pamela's cell phone. It was found on top of the quilt and, on top of the blood.
So someone placed it there after.
Seems like it. If this was a murder-suicide, why would the killer carefully place the phone on the body? It just doesn't fit, does it?
No, not at all. Any fingerprints?
Nope, none on the phone. So either it was wiped clean or it belonged to someone else.
Okay, so maybe not a straightforward murder-suicide after all.
Things are getting complicated. And it's not just the phone. The way Pamela's body was positioned, partially covered, her face shielded. It almost suggests a certain familiarity between her and the killer.
Chilling.
Mhm.
So we have a seemingly perfect family, a wealthy neighborhood, but the deeper you look, the more cracks start to appear. What was going on behind closed doors?
Well, even though Pamela was super close to her daughters, things weren't always smooth sailing. Ashley, the middle daughter, mentioned there were lots of arguments, typical family stuff.
Sure.
But in the months leading up to the killings, things got, really tense with Ellen, the youngest. She dropped out of grad school and was dating this older guy, Carlos.
Oh, I bet Mom wasn't happy about that.
You guessed it. Pamela thought Carlos was a bad influence and didn't want to buy Helen a house because she was afraid he'd move in.
So that's where the conflict comes in.
Yeah. And on the morning of the killings, they have this huge blow-up argument about the house. Pamela decides not to buy it for Helen because of Carlos. Well, Ashley revealed that Helen had a history of depression, even some previous suicide attempts. We can't ignore that context.
Definitely not. That adds a whole other layer to things.
Right. And Ashley even mentioned that she thought Helen might have been using drugs. She was really struggling. And Ashley actually said that if she'd been able to talk to Helen that day, she might have been able to calm her down. She was really feeling that guilt.
That's so sad.
It is. It's a tragic reminder about how fragile mental health can be and how important it is to reach out for support. But what's interesting is that the media, they immediately jumped on that murder-suicide story, just based on what the first responders thought.
Oh, wow. Public opinion formed already.
Yeah, but Detective Byerson had to come out and say, hey, hold on, the murder-suicide theory isn't from us, the investigators.
So they weren't convinced.
Not at all. They had their doubts right from the start, especially after hearing from Helen's boyfriend, Carlos. Yeah, he was on the phone with Helen right before she died, and what he says, well, it paints a very different picture of what might have happened.
Oh, okay. So now it's getting really interesting. We have the family thinking it's a murder-suicide, focused on Helen's struggles and that fight over the house. But the detectives aren't so sure.
Right, and then there's Carlos's call, which throws everything into question.
It's like we've been given a puzzle, but some of the pieces are missing. We're trying to figure out what happened, but we can't quite see the whole picture yet.
Exactly.
It's crazy how we can just, jump to conclusions based on appearances,
Totally. We see a wealthy family, a perfect neighborhood, and we think, oh, we've got this all figured out.
Classic case of don't judge a book by its cover.
Right. The Hargan case is a perfect example of that. So much more going on beneath the surface. Remember, we left off with those detectives questioning the murder-suicide theory, especially after hearing from Helen's boyfriend, Carlos.
Oh, yeah, Carlos. His 911 call really changes things, doesn't it?
Big time. I mean, the family's painting him as this, like, manipulative older guy preying on Helen.
But his call tells a totally different story.
Exactly. So let's break it down. Carlos is calling from Dallas, Texas, thousands of miles away from the crime scene.
Wow, he wasn't even there.
Nope. But here's the thing. He was actually on the phone with Helen when things went south.
Okay, so what did he say?
He's telling the dispatcher that Helen's sister is acting super strange, and he's freaking out. He needs help for Helen, like right now. He's pleading with the dispatcher to send someone over ASAP.
So he's worried about Helen's safety.
Exactly. He's terrified. Which, if you think about it, kind of contradicts the whole idea of Helen being the aggressor.
Yeah, if she'd just killed her mother, you wouldn't expect him to be so worried about her.
Right. His call completely shifts the focus. Makes us question who was actually in danger that day.
Okay, so what are some, key things he said that really stand out to you?
Well, at one point he's like, she's acting really weird, man. You need to get someone over there fast. Like, the desperation in his voice is palpable.
And he specifically mentions Helen's sister.
Yeah, which adds a whole other layer to things, right?
Definitely. Almost like he's suggesting Helen's sister is the one to worry about.
Right. And remember, all of this is happening while the media is going crazy with the murder-suicide angle.
Oh, so the public's already convinced.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It's a good example of how quickly a narrative can take hold, even if it's based on, incomplete information.
So the detectives have got their work cut out for them. They've got to sift through all these different stories and figure out what actually happened.
Yeah, they've got to separate fact from fiction, right? They're dealing with conflicting accounts, hidden resentments, and a ton of unanswered questions.
Where do you even start with something like that?
I mean, that's the million-dollar question. They've got to analyze the forensic evidence, go back over those witness statements, and explore other possible theories.
And they can't miss anything. Any tiny detail could be important.
Right. Remember that weird detail with the dog bed on Pamela's head?
Oh, yeah. What was up with that?
It's one of those things that just sticks with you. Could it mean something? Could it just be random?
Yeah, did the killer put it there out of guilt? Or were they trying to hide something?
It's definitely weird. I mean, every detail matters, right? The placement of that cell phone, the lack of fingerprints, the way the bodies were found, all clues.
Like a giant jigsaw puzzle, and they have to put it all together to find the truth.
It's just wild how one phone call can turn everything upside down.
Mm-hmm.
We went from a seemingly open and shut case to, a total mystery.
We've got the family thinking it's a murder-suicide, then there's Carlos, scared for Helen's life, and in the middle of it all, you've got the detectives trying to piece it all together.
And let's not forget the media frenzy pushing that murder-suicide narrative.
It's like everyone's playing a part in this. But what's the real story?
That's what we're going to find out in the final part of our deep dive. Man, this case really makes you think, doesn't it? About family, about truth, about how easily things can get twisted.
It's a reminder that nothing is ever as simple as it seems.
We've been talking about the Hargan family killings, this case that starts off looking like a straightforward murder-suicide.
But the more you dig, the less clear it becomes.
Exactly. We've got these conflicting accounts, the strange details of the crime scene, that frantic call from Carlos. It's like a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
And sometimes, even when you think you've got the right pieces, they just don't quite fit together.
As we wrap up our deep dive, I want to touch on something we haven't really talked about yet. The psychological side of all this.
Oh yeah, that's a whole other layer, isn't it?
I mean, imagine being those detectives walking into that house knowing two people are dead.
Must be incredibly heavy, the weight of the situation, all those emotions swirling around.
And you've got the family there too, grieving, desperate for answers.
It's a delicate balance for the investigators. They have to be sensitive to the family's pain, but they also have to do their job.
And think about what those detectives are exposed to. Those horrific scenes, the trauma.
It definitely takes a toll.
It's easy to forget that they're human too. They see things that most of us can't even imagine.
Absolutely. They have to deal with the emotional weight of these cases on top of everything else. It can't be easy.
And speaking of emotions, I think it's important to acknowledge the psychological impact this all has on everyone involved.
Yeah, we tend to focus on the physical evidence, the facts of the case, but there's a whole human element that can't be ignored.
Right. I mean, we've talked about the conflicting accounts, and you have to wonder how much of that is shaped by people's emotions, their grief, their fear, maybe even guilt.
Memories can be unreliable, especially in traumatic situations.
And think about the pressure on those detectives to solve the case, especially with the media frenzy surrounding it.
Oh, yeah, the media can be a huge factor. Once a narrative takes hold, it's hard to shake it, even if it's not entirely accurate.
So, stepping back for a second, this case really highlights the importance of critical thinking, doesn't it?
Big time.
It's so easy to jump to conclusions, to let our emotions cloud our judgment.
But we have to be willing to question what we think we know, look at things from different angles.
And be open to the possibility that we might be wrong. It's about being humble, about recognizing that we don't have all the answers.
And about being willing to change our minds when new information comes to light.
That's a good point.
It's a lesson we can all take away from this case.
I think so too. It's about being more discerning, more skeptical, not just in true crime cases, but in life in general.
Absolutely.
So much of what we believe is based on what we're told, what we read, what we see on social media.
We have to be careful about what information we choose to accept. Always question your sources.
Right. Like, who's saying this? Why are they saying it? What's their agenda?
Exactly. It's about thinking critically, about not just blindly accepting everything we're told.
This deep dive into the Hargan family killings has been a real eye-opener. It's shown us how complicated truth can be, how easily we can be misled by assumptions, and how important it is to never stop asking questions.
Even when the answers are hard to find.
Yeah, even then. So as we wrap up, I just want to thank you for joining us on this journey. It's been intense, I know, but hopefully you've learned a thing or two along the way.
I hope so too.
And remember, the search for truth doesn't end here. Keep asking questions, keep challenging narratives, keep an open mind. That's what this is all about.
Well said.